Good morning to all attendees on the West Coast, and good day to people from wherever you are. I'm Yawei Liu. I'm the executive editor of US-China Perception Monitor, a website dedicated to the deliberation and discussion of good relationship between the United States and China. I want to thank the co-organizers of this webinar. First of all, I want to thank US-China History, 美华史记. Kathy Huang is the editor of 美华史记, and today she will provide Chinese translation in the chat on some of the key points Marie is going to discuss when she presents on the life of Pearl Buck. I also want to thank American Chinese United Association for their support of this webinar. Other sponsors include Bi'an Wenhua, I guess Bi'an Culture, which is based in Los Angeles, and Charming Friends Dialogue, Qingfeng Luntan. So today, we are honored and privileged to have Marie Tona, who is the House Director and Curator of the Pearl S. Buck House Museum in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Marie got her degree from Temple University and her master's degree on museum studies from Johns Hopkins University. So Pearl S. Buck is one of the most intriguing Americans as far as US-China interaction is concerned. You know, I have my degree in American history. I did my dissertation on US-China relationship. As far as, you know, American who lives in China, you know, the only other.
And I just want to welcome everyone to the webinar, Pearl Buck and Her China. And as I was introduced, my name is Marie Toner. I am the Historic Site Director and Curator of the Pearl S. Buck House, and I will be delving into Pearl S. Buck and many things about her today. So before there's a lot you're going to learn about Pearl S. Buck, but there are some things you should keep in mind about her. Number one, the cultural attitudes and customs of both China and the United States shaped Pearl Buck's life and service as a cultural ambassador between the United States and China. Number two, Pearl Buck's literary work gave voice to diverse cultures and those who had not been heard, and succeeded incredibly dramatizing people and places that had been unknown and alien to most of her readers. Number three, she's passionately committed to the cause of social justice. Pearl Buck was active in the civil rights movement and an outspoken advocate for racial and cultural appreciation, with words that ring true to this day. Pearl Buck's activism manifested itself in humanitarian causes focused on the disabled and deprived children who face discrimination because of the circumstances of their birth, which continues to change lives today. Finally, Pearl Buck was ahead of her time and our time, and one of the most renowned, fascinating, and controversial figures ever to influence American and Chinese culture and literary history. So I am going to go in depth about the history of Pearl Buck, but I want to share a short video with you about the beginning of Pearl Buck's life.
Pearl S. Buck's future lay at a crossroads as she sat on this bench. More than 24 publishers had rejected her manuscript for her first novel. Only one was ready to take a chance on her, Richard Walsh. Pearl Buck was an American, but she'd grown up in China, the daughter of Presbyterian missionaries. As her father preached the gospel, her ama introduced Pearl to the lives of everyday Chinese in Chinese, the first language she spoke. She was at once Chinese and American, and she brought these two worlds together as she sat at her typewriter. For Pearl Buck loved to write. When she was just 6, she published her first essay. She also read the works of Charles Dickens. They inspired her writing style, built on the keen observation of the world around her. She attended English language schools, but she also studied Chinese. Then, at 18, she left China to attend college in Virginia. Her blonde hair blended with that of her classmates, but her dress and manner set her apart. She had to adapt, become more American, while holding China close in her heart. After graduation, she returned to China to nurse her dying mother. There she married Lawsing Buck, like her, an American living abroad. She found joy in teaching, in writing, and in her daughter Carol, born in 1920. But her marriage was difficult. So too was Carol's birth, which left her unable to have more children. Always wanting a large family, Pearl Buck adopted her daughter, Janice. Everything changed in 1927. Violence erupted throughout China. Armed Chinese targeted Nanjing University and its white faculty, including the Buck family. As fires raged, the Bucks hid in their house, fearing for their lives. But then the back gate opened. There, hobbling in on her bound feet, was Pearl Buck's friend, Mrs. Liu. She offered refuge in a tiny shed. Terrified, Pearl Buck considered killing her own children rather than have them be seized. At last, the mob left. Mrs. Liu had saved their lives, but nearly everything the Bucks owned was stolen, except a few treasures hidden by their Chinese friends. Although she'd experienced prejudice and persecution, Pearl Buck loved China and its people. Her life and experiences set her to writing and to New York, where a door opened to her new life.
Using that video as an introduction to Pearl Buck's life because I think it grasps why she began to write. Excuse me. There we go. But I'm going to go in depth about her life. So Pearl S. Buck was born on June 26, 1892 in Hillsborough, West Virginia. Pearl's parents, as you know, were Presbyterian missionaries in China since 1880, and they were home on furlough when she was born. She's the older child in this picture. They returned to China shortly after her birth. Pearl S. Buck grew up among the Chinese people. Because her parents preferred to live among the Chinese and not in a missionary compound, Chinese would be her first language. She would play with Chinese children, listen to their ideas, and absorb their culture. These experiences would later be used in her novels and writings. In 1899, at 6 years old, Pearl Seidenstricker wrote a letter from China to the editor of the Christian Observer in Louisville, Kentucky. It was her first published writing, and it appeared under the headline, Our Real Home in Heaven. She says, I am a little girl, 6 years old. I live in China. I have a big brother in college who is coming to China to help our father tell the Chinese about Jesus. I have 2 little brothers in heaven. Maudie went first, then Artie. then Edith, and on the 10th of last month, my little brave brother, Clyde, left us to go to our real home in heaven. Clyde said he was a Christian soldier and that heaven was his bestest home. Clyde was 4 years old, and we both love the little letters in the Observer. I wrote this all myself, and my hand is tired, so goodbye. Although Pearl Buck grew up in China and had a Confucius tutor and her Wang Ama, her mother also homeschooled her. Her mother exposed her to American culture, especially American holidays. Pearl S. Buck visited the United States in 1901, but in 1910, Pearl Buck returned to enroll in Randolph-Macon Women's College in Virginia. She received a bachelor's degree in philosophy in 1914 and was invited to teach psychology at the college. However, she returned to China shortly after to take care of her ailing mother. In 1916, while in China, she meets her first husband, John Lossing Buck. He is an agricultural missionary. In 1917, they married and spent the first 5 years in North China. This is where she saw much of what inspired her to write The Good Earth, which is her best-known work. On March 4th, 1920, Pearl Buck gave birth to her first and only biological child. Her name was Carol. She became concerned that Carol was not developing normally. Eventually, Carol would be diagnosed with PKU, which is fetal catanuria. If not treated immediately at birth, it can lead to brain damage, intellectual disabilities, behavioral symptoms, and seizures. Today, when babies are born, they do blood tests by pricking the baby's heel to detect PKU. You can actually learn more about Pearl S. Buck and her experiences with her daughter through one of her novels. It's called The Child Who Never Grew. We also focused a virtual exhibit on this topic. You can go to www.pearlsbuck.org/exhibits/gallery, and it is titled I Speak as One Who Knows, the story behind the child who never grew. It was about her personal feelings with her daughter, Carol, and the book helped many parents and still does. In 1924, the Buck family returned to the United States to go to Cornell University, where Pearl S. Buck received her master's degree in English literature. Before they returned to China again, they adopted a baby girl named Janice, since Pearl Buck was unable to have more children. In 1927, as you learned from the video, the Buck family experiences the Nanking Incident. The Nanking Incident occurred on March 21st through the 23rd of 1927, when Chinese nationalist troops entered the city at the northern part as part of their Northern Expedition military campaign. These troops targeted the city's foreign residences, and several were killed or injured and their properties looted, including Pearl Buck's. And the American, Japanese, and British consulates were also attacked. They went into hiding, the Buck family, until they were rescued, and they escaped to Japan. Pearl Buck spent about a year there before returning to China, which was still a threatening atmosphere for foreigners. Even during this time, she was still concerned about her daughter, Carol, and she knew that she would need special care. In 1929, she enrolled Carol in the Vineland Training School in Vineland, New Jersey, where Carol would live out the remainder of her life. She was concerned about being able to pay for Carol's needs, so she really began to write. Pearl S. Buck first wrote the novel East Wind, West Wind, and it was published by the John Day Publishing Company in 1930 by Richard Walsh, who would become her second husband. Her next book would be The Good Earth, and it was awarded the Pulitzer in 1932 and remained on the bestseller list for 21 months, and in 1937 became an Oscar award-winning film. In addition to this, Pearl S. Buck wrote thousands of different publications during her lifetime. This includes a cookbook, children's books, plays, and more. She wrote about China, and if you search for the word China in the titles of her works, you will find it 140 times. In addition to The Good Earth, she wrote Sons and A House Divided, which she made into a book called The House of Earth. She wrote The Exile about her mother and The Fighting Angel about her father. You will also find out a lot about her life through her autobiographical book, My Several Worlds. Other books about China include Dragon Seed, Imperial Woman, The Promise, The Three Daughters of Madame Liang, and more. In 1934, to escape the continued threat to foreigners to China, she decided to go back to the United States. And in 1935, she divorced her husband, John Lossing Buck, and married her publisher, Richard Walsh, on the same day, mind you. She then purchased Green Hills Farm in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is where I work today. It is the headquarters of Pearl S. Buck International, and you can visit her home and see her mostly intact collection, such as her typewriter and desk, and where she wrote The Good Earth on. At the home, she would raise her family, and her husband, Richard, would together adopt 3 sons and 3 daughters, 2 of whom were biracial, and she also fostered many children. In 1938, Pearl Buck was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for her body of work, which would include East Wind, West Wind, The Good Earth, Sons, A House Divided, The Mother, The Young Revolutionist, The First Wife, The Exile, The Fighting Angel, This Proud Heart, and the translation of All Men Are Brothers. She was the first American woman to be awarded both the Pulitzer and the Nobel Prizes for Literature. And not only was she so accomplished for her literary achievements, but she was a driving force in humanitarian causes as well. She would become a lifelong advocate for cross-cultural understanding and racial harmony. And when she came to the United States in 1934, she witnessed all sorts of discrimination. She became a vocal supporter of the civil rights movement, and during World War II, with her husband, she created the East and West Association. I think the East and West Association is a very important organization that they started, although it is not thriving today. The East and West Association was a nonprofit, non-political organization having its purpose the interpretation of countries East and West through their peoples in order that during these times of war and in peace to follow, there may be a better understanding between peoples of the world. To be able to do that, they decided to provide in all possible ways the knowledge necessary for these essential understanding the purpose of the East and West Association. So they used radio, through press, in study, and discussion groups, in motion pictures, by all means of communication which seems the people own. Not only did she use these forms of communications, she was one of the first paperback novels, The Good Earth, and she also helped create a superhero character called Johnny Everyman. She was on the board of DC Comics, and she decided that she wanted to be able to reach all people. That included people who simply looked at comic books. So Johnny Everyman was not your typical superhero. He was actually a man who could understand all peoples and all languages and was able to communicate with all of them. The association sought to tell people on 2 sides of the world about each other, about their lives, their customs, their beliefs, and ideals and aspirations. With her husband, she also took over Asia Magazine and turned it into a magazine to report on Asia and its peoples instead of a travel and luxury magazine, which it was formerly known for. As I mentioned, Pearl S. Buck was involved in more than being a writer. She was a humanitarian and activist for many different groups and peoples. Specifically regarding the Chinese Exclusion Act, Pearl S. Buck created an undeniable victory for equality with the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Miss Buck and her husband created the Citizens Committee to Repeal Chinese Exclusion. The committee shared the quarters of the John Day Publishing Company and the East and West Association and a dozen other projects Pearl, Buck, and Richard were involved with. Mr. and Mrs. Walsh celebrated their victory over dinner in New York's Chinatown. Pearl Buck is pictured here, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit. But after enduring decades of discrimination, the negative image of Chinese in the American consciousness began to change in the 1930s and 40s with Pearl Buck's The Good Earth, which was published in 1932. She portrayed the Chinese for the American people. Miss Buck is pictured here with the group of Chinese American supporters during a break in her testimony before the House Committee of Immigration and Naturalization in May of 1943. Pearl S. Buck said in her statement, "I have tried to explain that these inclusion acts to the people of China were made at a time when Chinese themselves were being exploited by ruthless Americans who enticed them to this country in droves, combing the streets of overcrowded Chinese cities for cheap labor in American mines and on American railroads. But I had to confess time and again that these conditions existed no more. I had to confess that there was no reason at all for the total exclusion of Chinese from the United States. I had to confess that the Chinese we have here in America are amongst our best citizens. They do not go on relief. Their crime record is very low. They are honest and industrious and friendly." They would say, "Then why are we being excluded?" This was always the next question. I parroted it as best I could. I tried to laugh and say, "Why do you care? It would only be 100 odd who could get in anyway. You have a great and beautiful country of your own." "No," they would say, "that's not the point. Whether one went in or 100 was not the point. No, the point was this, that China's friendly feelings were hurt by the total exclusion, which implied that Chinese were inferior peoples to all other people, to Mexicans, to South Americans, to the peoples of Germany and Italy and Spain and all of Europe." Pearl S. Buck and the committee continued to speak against the Exclusion Act, and by the end of the same year, the Exclusion Act was repealed. Pearl S. Buck began the Welcome House Adoption Program. It was created in 1949. She wanted to find homes for biracial children who were considered unadoptable simply because of the circumstances of their birth. At that time, Pearl Buck was an adoptive mother herself and knew firsthand that love shared between parents and their children was strong enough to overcome any challenges they may encounter. Over the years, Pearl Buck opened the doors to her home and her heart to 7 adopted children and many other foster children, most of whom were biracial. As one of the first activists for transracial adoptions, Pearl Buck made an impact not only in her local community, but also throughout the nation. Thanks in large part to Pearl Buck's advocacy, U.S. adoption agencies changed their policies of matching children only with families of the same race and ethnicity. Although it was originally founded to facilitate adoptions in the United States of biracial children, Welcome House expanded its charter in 1956 to provide international adoption services for abandoned and orphaned children whose families and communities could not care for them. Welcome House, which began as one woman's passion and inspiration, has placed over 7,000 children in adoptive homes. Due to the declining number of healthy young children available for international adoption in the countries in which it worked, the mission was fulfilled and the Welcome House Adoption Program officially closed in June of 2014. In this picture, you can see Pearl Buck with 2 small children. The child on the right would be David, and David would be the first child who would come to her door and who she would help. And ultimately, he became chairman of our board at one point and still serves as an emeritus member today. In 1964, the Pearl S. Buck Foundation was founded to eliminate prejudice and injustices suffered by children who experienced discrimination because of the circumstances of their birth. Today, the foundation is known as Pearl S. Buck International. Pearl S. Buck was a woman of action. She saw children throughout the world suffering as a result of injustices and prejudices and did something about it. In 1964, Pearl S. Buck founded an international children's charity, the Pearl S. Buck Foundation, to address the issues of poverty and discrimination faced by children primarily in Asian countries. She devoted much of her time and energy during the last years of her life to raising money and awareness for this important cause. You can see in this picture Pearl S. Buck with several children. This would be Pearl S. Buck in Korea. This is where the first sponsorship program started. She established an orphanage in 1965 to serve those Amerasian children. It was the Opportunity Center pictured here. 2 years later, a branch office was opened in Thailand and another in the Philippines in 1968, and children in Vietnam were also served prior to the war. However, operations were shut down by the Vietnamese government in 1975 and then reopened in 1989. The international programs established by Pearl S. Buck are funded through child sponsorship. Donations from individuals who sponsor a child are used to help provide children and their families with the basic necessities of life: food, clothing, shelter, and education. Additionally, the sponsorship program creates a unique cross-cultural experience for both the sponsor and the child through the exchange of letters and photographs. In an effort to provide support to all the children in PSBI's programs, the Champions for Children's program was established. This program allows champions to forego a personal relationship with an individual child and reduces the overhead costs, allowing more of their contribution to assist children in the Pearl S. Buck International's program. Pearl S. Buck International oversees programs that are carried out today through our country offices and affiliates and partners. We have them in China, the Philippines, Taiwan, Thailand, South Korea, and Vietnam. The children and their families served by Pearl S. Buck International face poverty and discrimination because of the circumstances of their birth. They may be ethnic or racial minorities, orphans, disabled, displaced refugees, or affected by HIV and AIDS. Without the assistance provided by this program, these children would be denied access to education, basic health care, as well as social and civil rights. Pearl S. Buck worked tirelessly as an author, social activist, and humanitarian, with words that often got started on her typewriter. She exposed the Western world to Chinese culture, fought for the rights of marginalized people around the world, including children, immigrants, the developmentally disabled, lobbied for racial justice, and promoted women's rights. Over time, this tireless leader received much recognition, ranging from her Pulitzer and Nobel Prizes to her regular inclusion on lists of world's most admired women. But there is a price for leadership and social activism, and though millions of people admired Pearl Buck and her work, there were others who found her controversial, even threatening, because of her strong stand on social justice and human rights, particularly as a woman during that time. In 1937, the FBI opened a file on Pearl Buck because of her support of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and other organizations devoted to civil and human rights. It grew to be more than 300 pages long, making it one of the largest of those assembled on prominent writers of their period, including Langston Hughes, Dorothy Parker, and F. Scott Fitzgerald. In Pearl Buck's case, the FBI noted her attacks on racial discrimination as cause for concern. In the eyes of the FBI, she represented a potential threat to the country. As she neared the end of her life, Pearl Buck was viewed with suspicion by the governments of the two countries she loved and had called home, the United States and China. In 1972, President Richard M. Nixon announced that he would make a historic visit to the People's Republic of China. Pearl Buck wrote to him asking if she might join him. She had not returned to China since 1934, and she dearly wished to visit the land she loved and called her home for the first half of her life. Even after leaving China, Pearl Buck had continued to work tirelessly to build stronger ties between China and the United States. In recognition of the money she raised for Chinese war victims from 1938 to 1945, China awarded her the Order of the Jade. In 1943, she pressed the U.S. to repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act, as I discussed, which was enforced since 1882. But much had changed in the country where she had lived for so long, and the communist leadership would not approve her visa. Chinese leadership feared that the famous woman would use her public platform to criticize what the country had become in the 40 years since she had last been there. She actually received a notification that her visa would not be issued from the second secretary in the Canadian consulate for China, and they said that in view of the fact that for a long time in your works you have taken an attitude of smear and vilification towards the people of New China and their leaders, I am authorized to inform you that we cannot accept your request for a visit to China. Pearl Buck paid a high price for her valiant acts and words in support of justice. She enjoyed the fruits of her considerable success, but she also learned that a high profile can stir hatred and notoriety. But this never deterred her from continuing to write, to speak out, and to offer leadership on the causes about which she was passionate. On March 6, 1973, at the age of 80, she died of lung cancer in Vermont. She is buried on the property at Pearl S. Buck International, which is now a National Historic Landmark. And it's where we continue the work of Pearl S. Buck today. On March 6, 1973, Richard Nixon wrote this. In life, Pearl Buck was a human bridge between the civilizations of the East and the West. With simple eloquence, she translated her personal love for the people and culture of China into a rich literary heritage treasured by Asians and Westerners alike. She lived a long, full life as an artist, wife, mother, and philanthropist. Through her eyes, millions of readers were able to see the beauty of China and its people at a time when direct personal contact was impossible. It is fitting that Pearl Buck lived to see two people she loved so much draw closer together during her last years. Mrs. Nixon and I join all Americans in extending our sympathy to her and her family and mourning the passing of this great artist. I want to talk specifically about Pearl Buck in China. Miss Buck did much to build understanding between China and the United States. Her contributions were not apparent in China until more than 20 years after her death in 1973. Over time, her work has been studied and her contributions are now embraced. Today, the imprint she left in China is memorialized with museums that honor her life and legacy. And I want to discuss some of those places. There are several. So in Zhenjiang, in Jiangsu province, Pearl S. Buck lived 18 years of her life in the city of Zhenjiang. She's considered the daughter of the city. The home was converted into a visitation center, established a museum in her memory. They continue research to understand her work and carry out humanitarian efforts in partnership with Pearl S. Buck International. So some of those specific places are the former residence. The Zhenjiang government and its sister city in Arizona recognized Pearl S. Buck's contribution to Chinese culture and history by restoring her childhood home and opening it to the public in 1992. The home was established as a cultural heritage of Jiangsu province in 2002. Then there is the Pearl S. Buck Park. A special park was opened in the name of Pearl Buck in 2005. The park features 2 large memorial tablets depicting the life and contributions of Pearl Buck. There's the Pearl S. Buck Research Center. The Pearl S. Buck's her tenure in China has attracted the attention of many scholars who work to evaluate and educate others on her work, advocacy, and literature. The Pearl S. Buck Research Center was established during the 110th anniversary of her birth and commemorating the occasion with its first international conference in 2002. It continues as a hub of scholarly activity on the life and legacy of Pearl Buck. There is the Pearl S. Buck Museum in Philanthropy Pavilion. The Pearl S. Buck Museum opened in 2008 across the street from the former residence, and in 2010 it was renovated and reopened with an additional space. It now features a timeline of her life and published books along with replicas of Pearl Buck's most prestigious awards and honorary degrees. And then there is the Conchi Girls High School. Perlis Buck ranks as both one of the school's most legendary students and teachers. Since 2003, Perlis Buck International has enabled financial disadvantaged students at the school to continue their high school education through our child sponsorship program, which boasts a 99% admission rate for higher education. Then there is Lushan, and that is where the Perlis Buck Memorial Hall is located. Mount Lushan is home to an enclave of villas once operated by the Presbyterian missionaries as a retreat from the long, hot summers in the city. Perlis Buck and her family enjoyed many summers in the small villa on the mountain with a breathtaking view, and the house was renovated in 2005 and is open to the public for daily tours. There's Nanjing, the Perlis Buck House at Nanjing University. Perlis Buck lived on the campus of Nanjing University with her husband and 2 children prior to returning to the United States. It is the house where she wrote The Good Earth. And in 2012, officials at the university hosted the grand opening of the renovated Perlis Buck House on its historic campus and held an international symposium about Perlis Buck's years in Nanjing. There's Sosu, in Anu province, Perlis Buck Memorial Hall at the university there. Pearl Buck lived there for a period of time during her married life, and it is the area that provided Perlis Buck with the setting and characters for The Good Earth. As a result, the university dedicated an exhibit hall to her memory with a grand opening ceremony and symposium in 2010, and named a pond and bridge on the campus after her. So there is a lot going on at all of those places in China. She makes a huge impact. And she continues, they are still doing many things today. Okay, so I just want to see how much time I have here. 37. Okay. So I just want to finish up by talking a little bit about what Perlis Buck International does today and what the Perlis Buck House does, and about how she decided that she wanted to be buried here. So in 1966, Perlis Buck said, "During my long career, there is an accumulation of objects that I treasure, various gifts and awards that until now have been put away. I wanted to share them with people, to let them be shown to my readers, those who in a sense had made it possible for me to receive such awards. I propose that the house be on exhibition and the money thus earned to be added to the fund for the children who are lost unless they are found. This is how it happens that the Chinese things I own are now in the house, prizes and awards, the family Bible, the paintings, the ancient Chinese faces, art objects and manuscripts, the leather-bound first editions of my books. I feel content to know that in this way, too, my life is of use and will so continue to be when I am no longer here in this body that now contains me." Also in 1966, Pearl Buck transferred ownership of Green Hills Farm to the Perlis Buck Foundation. And in 1972, she wrote, "Inasmuch as the house in Pennsylvania is being declared a National Historic Monument, and insofar as it is my wish that my final resting place be there, be it hereby known that it is also my desire that the contents of the Bucks County House remain as nearly intact as possible." In 1974, the Perlis Buck House was entered into the National Historic Register of Places, and tours started shortly after in 1980. It was designated a historic landmark then. Shortly after she moved onto this property, you can see her house pictured here. "I would like to be buried here on the site, but not so close to the children's play area or in the view of visitors to be distracted or a reminder of sadness to the living." According to her wishes, she was buried underneath the ash tree at Green Hills Farm, and the area remains an area of solitude and contemplation among the pines, bamboo, lush flowers, and grasses. So there's many ways you can enjoy the Perlis Buck House today. I hope I inspired you to come for a visit, but I want to tell you that there are several different options for tours. There is our Life and Legacy Tour, which is your typical historic house tour. You'll learn about the history of Pearl Buck. You'll learn about the architecture of the house. You'll learn about the history of the times that she was living in. Then there's our Taking Action Tour, where you will also see the beautiful house, but you will learn about all of the endeavors that Pearl Buck was involved with during her lifetime. Children who were disabled, biracial children, the relations with China, women's rights, civil rights, and more. And now we are offering virtual tours as well. So in addition to everything you learned today, you can take a virtual tour. So you can check out our website, www.pearlsbuck.org, and you would be able to check out some of the options that we have. When the pandemic is over, hopefully we'll be having events again. There's many events that we are involved with that we do to help raise funds to continue the legacy of Pearl S. Buck and continue our mission. I did put another link in here if you're interested in hearing Pearl Buck's voice, because I think I need to wrap up my presentation here a little bit so I can make sure I answer questions. But if you want to hear Pearl S. Buck's voice, there is a short audio clip on this website here, and it's Pearl Buck's writing, and she wrote this, I believe, and I think some of us would find it interesting to see. And if you're going to use any of these images, just make sure you realize the copyright loss. And so I guess I can take questions now.
Thanks, Marie. That's a very thorough introduction of the legendary life of Pearl S. Buck. I cannot help but to point to two things. Number one, Suzhou. I didn't know that she lived with her husband over there for almost 5 years. That's where my ancestors used to live. That's a very poor part of China. That's also where the first farmers' rebellion that happened, when China was first unified. So I understand the conditions, the sacrifice her husband and she, in order to help the farmers. So what she described in Good Earth is actually my ancestors. That's where my roots are. Secondly, to see how China has changed, because right now there's a lot of demonization of China going on here in the US. You mentioned about her application for a visa in 1972 in order to travel to China with President Nixon, and how that visa request was denied. And then you also mentioned how in Zhenjiang, in Lushan, at Nanjing University, on the campus of Nanjing, and as well as in Suzhou, people are now not only just remembering her, but also looking at her legacy. This is how far China has come from the xenophobic of the 1960s and 70s now to the fact that, she's very well fondly remembered by the Chinese people. So that's where China is now, although there are concerns about where China is going to go next, but still, that contrast is very important. We do have one person, I think Clark Lambo raised his hand. I don't know whether, Clark, can you hear me? If you have a question for Marie, please unmute yourself and pose your question. Again, you can pose your question to the chat, or if you want to ask a live question to Marie, just raise your hand. Clark? Well, if Clark is not unmuting himself, there's a question in the chat. The question is Pearl Buck well known among ordinary Americans, or, most of the Americans have never heard of her, and particularly they're not aware of her special connections to China and her work in kind of building the bridges between US and China?
Yes. So it seems that the current younger generations don't really know about Pearl Buck. Those who do know about her, it's because they read The Good Earth in high school. A lot of our visitors are from the older generations. That is why we decided to make our Taking Action tour, because we thought that if we could focus on her activism, that would be more relatable for audiences of today. And we do also have a program called our high school leadership program, where we teach 9th through 11th graders leadership skills. So we also try and work with the surrounding school districts to bring Pearl Buck back into the reading material and get them to take tours of the house. So yes, she is a hidden figure, and that is because of just as we talked about, the rejection of the visa and then the FBI file. And so you have to take a lot of bad with the good, and sometimes people focus on the negative instead of the positive, and they don't realize all of these things that she had her hands in during her lifetime.
Thanks. There are two quick questions. One is there an audio version of the book for Good Earth?
I'm not 100% sure if there's an audio version. I know that there are versions on like the Nook, through the family owns the rights to all the books, most of the books. So those books are on the Nook. I think they are actually working on audio. But I'm pretty sure I've seen an audio for the Good Earth. You just have to research it online.
The other question is, how many visitors do you guys have annually, to the property?
I want to say that we were, for about paid guests or people with passes, we were about 15,000. That doesn't include all of our events and things like that, or people just stopping in to see our gift shop. We have a wonderful gift shop run by our volunteers, and things like that. So I think with our weddings, we have a huge property. We have 68 acres, of property. So we have many different events. So they might not step foot in the house, but they do come on our property. And that's probably about pre-pandemic, we're going to go with about 200,000 people a year.
That's great. You mentioned in your presentation, you said the Pearl S. Buck International, the foundation, has operations in China. What kind of operations you guys have in China? Do you have a partner that is working with you? Because China passed the international NGO management law 3 years ago. In order for NGO like yours to work in China, you have to register. Are you aware of that?
I don't know much detail about that, but I know that we work still with the Kanchi Girls School through the sponsorship program. You can still sponsor in that school today. And then I've worked specifically with the research center and the other museums in different projects, just working through our archival collection, or on exhibits and other details that they're looking for in China as well.
Have you traveled to these museums or not yet?
No, not yet. That their visit was in 2012, I want to say. They did this footprints exhibit or travel, and I did not get to go, unfortunately, but hopefully the next time that we're traveling with China, once we get through all of this, hopefully I will be able to visit.
Yeah, I think when the pandemic is over, we should, or you guys actually, we will certainly help, to contact the Chinese tourist agencies when they organize tours to the US. This place has to be a must visit, on their itinerary because of the special relationship there. Now I have a question on, because Pearl Buck left China in 1934, and she tried to go to China in 1972. Now in between, what happened? Did Pearl Buck have any communication with her friends in China? And what about Taiwan, the Republic of China after it, 1949. Did Republic of China, Taiwan, ever have any relationship with Pearl Buck?
I haven't done a lot of research on the time in between, but I will say that there is definitely correspondence in our archives about that time. I can't tell you specifically what they are. She was involved with Lin Yutang. She was involved with the artist Chen Qi. So I know that there's connections there. I just haven't researched them in depth. And I'm not aware of any relationship with Taiwan.
So here, initially, I was trying to ask Clark. He said he had internet connection issues, so he couldn't speak. So his question is speculative, and it is as follows. With all the political tension between the US and China and social tension directed towards Chinese Americans and more broadly Asian Americans, what do you think Pearl Buck comments on both situations would be today?
So I always say that when someone asks me a speculative question about what Pearl Buck would say, I always say that I don't know, because she's not around now and her perspective could be so different from what it was then, if that makes sense. But I would say that she would want the people to have dialogue with one another. I think that she would want, instead of an argument or a fight or to be negative or to be just racist and ignorant, that you should have a conversation about it. Why does one feel the way that they do? So that other people's perspectives can be put out there. And so when you have more perspectives and more people talking, you have different viewpoints and maybe you can make better judgments about what's going on in the world. I think there needs to be an open line of communication.
Thanks. Another question is related to her past work, particularly on the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act and her effort to raise money for China's war effort against Japan. Can you name some of the prominent Americans that Pearl S. Buck has enlisted to further these two causes, the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, as well as the effort to raise money for China during the war?
So I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have names off the top of my head. I know that she frequently would work with other women on different things, but in our archival collection, there is communication to everyone that she wrote to regarding the war efforts, the raising funds for the war efforts. And also there is information about who was involved with the Chinese Exclusion Act as well. I'm trying to pull up at least one of them. So like I said, our archival papers really have a lot of information about all of the endeavors that she was doing during her lifetime. For these efforts.
Now, in terms of the papers, so if a researcher goes there, I want to research on her effort, on the causes that I just mentioned, can they just make copies of the thing, or you guys have to do it, or are they allowed to make copies, or just use a digital camera and take pictures of these files?
So they could definitely just take pictures. They could come on site and make copies as well if they wanted to research in person. There is a fee for making copies. And then there is also like a virtual archival fee. So if you were to have me do the research for you and make the copies, there would be a fee for that as well. But if you were just to come if you knew everything you were looking for, I would pull the files for you ahead of time. On our website at www.pearl-s-buck.org, if you scroll down to the bottom, there is a link for the Pearl S. Buck and Richard Walsh papers, and that is our archival finding aid. And you can do a search. You can search for the Chinese Exclusion Act. Any search you want to do, you can find it. And then if you let me know which records you want to see, I would give you a paper to fill out. You would tell me which record group, which folders, and I would pull those off for you when you would come in.
So we have a question from Mark Zhang, and he's asking what kind of programs in China that you need more funding to support the activities there?
So I don't think at this time there's any like specific, what's the word I'm looking for? The only thing that we help with in China at this current time are the girls in the Kanchi school. So those are the girls that don't have the funding for their tuition or for their books or for food, etc. So they are high school age girls that we help through our program. There in our other countries, we do offer help for like projects, but at this time, there's no projects that I know about in China specifically.
And this, you said you offer money to high school girls. That's the school where Pearl Buck used to teach, right? In Zhenjiang City?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The Kanchi Girls School. Yep.
There, I know you have a board and family members are very much involved in the running of the foundation. Which country now the foundation is most active and spends most of the funding?
So our excuse me. So we have a lot of sponsored children in our programs. We have Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam, then the girls in China. And I want to say that we help all of these partners equally. I don't think that there is like a big jump from one to the other about how many kids are being sponsored. I mean, they suffer from different needs. Maybe not suffer, but they're looking for help with different needs. Some of them are for education. Some of them are for healthcare. We also have a program where you can support a specific need. So we know that a lot of times food is very important, or providing their school uniforms or health checkups. We even supply them with jump ropes or shoes. And then, like I said, there's different ways you can help. So you can either support one specific child, or you can go and help the whole orphanage. And that's through the Champions for Children. And then we have the Fund a Project. So those projects we have in Thailand. We're actually working in Uganda now, in Kenya. So we're working on a playground project for them. And then we have COVID-19 pandemic peer counseling in the Philippines. And then we have transport services for children with HIV in Vietnam. And let's see if there's Vietnam. We also have our mosquito and insect control and prevention. And so there's like so many. Provide vaccinations in Thailand. In the Philippines, cyber sexual abuse awareness and prevention. Help for a disaster in the Philippines. And then we have swimming training and drowning prevention in Vietnam. We want to be able to offer as many programs and projects and sponsor as many children as possible through Pearl S. Buck International, because that was her goal when she was living, to support as many children as we possibly can and get involved with them.
Thanks. I think that's a very, very significant involvement of the foundation in the developing countries. So 2 more quick questions, and then I think we're going to end this webinar. One is, are you aware if Good Earth is on the mandatory reading list for American high school or middle school students?
It was. It no longer is. We are trying to get back on that list.
Okay. The second is, you said the FBI file on Pearl S. Buck is run as long as 300 pages. Did you guys actually ask for the pages under the Freedom of Information Act of the US government?
So the FBI file is actually available online. There are parts that are still redacted that you can't see,
Right.
but a majority of the FBI file is online for you to view.
Online at the FBI website or at your website?
Let me see. I know I have it in my collection, so if somebody wanted to see it, I could definitely scan it over to them. Let's see if I can pull it up really quick, though. Okay, so if you go to, I guess it's it says HTTP, I'll put it in the chat. It's vault.fbi.gov/pearlbuck. And then it's in different parts. It's in 4, oh, that one's not working. None of them are working. You may have to get it from me. Hold on. Interesting. The links inside the link aren't working.
Okay.
So
we probably can Google it and find out. You know, if you find a live link, if you just drop the note to me, I will send that to everyone who have registered for today's webinar.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting that that's not working. And if I can't find a link, I can certainly, if someone is very interested, I have the scans of it and can share it via email. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. It's just mtoner@pearlsbuck.org.
Right. I think Mei Gao of Kennesaw State University asked, you know, whether the Zhenjiang house where the Bucks used to live, it's open to public, right? That's for sure.
Yes.
And Ed Krebs of the U.S.-China Friendship Association asked, do you have many people coming to do research at your site?
We get about 3 or 4 stories a year of people who actually go through the documentation. I probably get questions at least 4 times a month through my email that I can easily answer. That doesn't necessarily have to go through the archival collection to get the answers. But there are lots of people interested and lots of people looking. So. And I think with some of our virtual exhibits, we've gotten some traction with those as well. So we have one on Pearl S. Buck and civil rights, and we have one on Pearl S. Buck and her daughter, as I talked about. And our next one is going to be on Pearl S. Buck and women. So I'm sure that at some point it's going to be Pearl S. Buck in China. So you will always want to check out our website for new editions and things going on too.
Thanks. I think one of our attendees mentioned in the chat saying the legacy of Pearl Buck is very important, particularly today when racial harmony is very difficult here, when violence and abuse of Asian Americans, Chinese Americans are becoming more and more rampant. So it's really time for us to recall and also to apply, the convictions and that Pearl Buck tried to advocate it, when she was around. So it's very, very important for us to learn more about her and her legacy. So on behalf of all the attendees and all the organizations that are involved in today's webinar, I want to thank you wholeheartedly. I also hope that we will be able to become a bridge. Pearl Buck during her lifetime and now is a bridge between US and China. So the attendees today and the organizations that are involved in supporting today's webinar, we hope that will be a bridge for the foundation, Pearl S. Buck Foundation, to get more programming on the ground in China, so that more people will remember her and her legacy. And this also is what US and China needs. The government-to-government relationship is getting more difficult. That's when people-to-people relationship has to become thicker and thicker. So we hope that the foundation, you can get the message to the board to increase your programming in China, and also more programming on improving mutual understanding between the US and China. So again, thank you, Marie, and thank you all the attendees. We will send you the link to you guys, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We really appreciate to be able to talk about Pearl S. Buck today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Yeah.